The Moon Knight show is weird. It's different. It doesn't feel like Marvel, and that's a good thing. The show gets a lot right, but when it comes down to it, Moon Knight still falls to the same problems as the other Marvel Disney Plus shows, leaving me with the feeling that Moon Knight is almost brilliant. Welcome to Cinemaze, and before we get any further, there will be spoilers for the Moon Knight series, so beware. The Moon Knight show is very different from what I was expecting. The trailer sold this show as a dark and brutal story, dealing with mental health issues with the hint of the supernatural. This is pretty much what episode 1 gave us, and I loved that first episode. And this aligns more with the comic version of the character, who is a very street level hero who doesn't really have any powers, and it leaves it ambiguous as to whether the gods are real or not. Part of the fun of the comics is that you never truly know if the god is real or if Moon Knight is just crazy. In the comics, Moon Knight doesn't have powers. He designs his gear and suit and fights crime in a very similar way to Batman. But episode 2 made it very clear very quickly that the gods truly are real, and this is going to be a very different show than I was expecting. This was a bit disappointing to me at first, as I was hoping we would get the mystery like we do in the comics, but once I accepted how this was going to be different, I began to enjoy the show more, and realised that the mystery and intrigue were coming from other aspects of the show. Not only was the show different from what I was expecting, but each episode was different from each other. Episode 1 was a character piece about a man suffering from mental health issues. Episode 2 began to lean into the supernatural. Episode 3 was an Indiana Jones style adventure. Episode 4 had dark horror elements. Episode 5 was my personal favourite, and that was a tragic psychological mystery. And episode 6 was a superhero action finale. This made each weekly episode unique and interesting and built on the previous, and mostly they all blended together in a way that worked. Tonally, Kevin Feige said that this was Marvel's most violent project yet, and while episode 1 and 2 had deep themes and a few darker moments, it still had that classic MCU humour and tone. As the show went on, however, the series began to find a unique tone, and episodes 4 and 5 really lent into the darker, scarier and more violent tone, and I think that really worked. The show also didn't feel connected to the MCU, and I think that worked wonderfully. I only counted 2 references to the wider MCU, a mention of Madripoor and the GRC organisation, both first introduced in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I loved that this felt independent and wasn't bogged down by the greater MCU. Projects like Shang-Chi and the Eternals felt like they forced MCU references into those films to encourage audiences to watch them, so I appreciate that they trusted Moon Knight to work without these MCU references. I'm sure Moon Knight will connect with the MCU later, and that's great, but I don't need the references now. Build the character and build the world of Moon Knight first to then earn the MCU connections later, and that's exactly what they did, and I think that worked well. For a superhero show, there was actually very little of Moon Knight being a superhero. For 2 whole episodes we had Moon Knight stripped of his powers. Now this might disappoint some people, especially because the character is very action heavy in the comics, but again I love that they trusted the character to be interesting enough to not need the action. WandaVision did a similar thing and it worked well for both shows. A superhero is only as interesting as their alter ego, and so we should be as invested in them outside of the suit as much as we are when they are in the suit. And Moon Knight really was more interesting when he was not being a superhero, and it really worked, especially for the first 5 episodes. And where I think Moon Knight absolutely excels and where it is strongest is with its characters and cast. The version of Moon Knight created for this show is just so great to watch. In the comics, we always think of Marc Spector as the main personality of Moon Knight, while his other personalities just feel like slightly different levels of crazy. They rarely feel like different characters. So starting this show with a different personality of Moon Knight, with Stephen Grant, making him so kind and endearing, was honestly a stroke of genius, making us care more about one of the made up personalities compared with the original personality worked so well and separated the personalities into truly their own distinct characters. They realised Marc Spector isn't the most likeable character, so they introduced us to a different version of him, which we would enjoy watching, and then slowly revealed details about Marc's past that made us care about Marc as the show went on. The personalities played off each other. At the start, Marc is in control and aware of what's going on and informing Steven, but as the show goes on, we learn more about Marc and he slowly has less control, and Steven ends up helping Marc out. I know some people have criticised the accent for Stephen Grant, but A, the original personality is not really British, so a bad accent kind of makes sense, and B, the character was so likeable that it just became part of the charm. But none of this could have worked without Oscar Isaac playing this role. Honestly, it was incredible. His performance absolutely carried this show. He was able to switch between personalities effortlessly, bringing a physicality to the role, and made each personality feel unique in their voice, their facial expressions, and the way they moved. I truly cannot imagine another actor pulling this role off as well as he did, and the success of this show and the character massively is down to him. Ethan Hawke as Arthur Harrow, the villain of the series, was also amazing casting. He brought a lot of nuance and gravitas to the role. He really had an interesting screen presence where you understood where he was coming from, but you were scared of him. He felt weird, but you weren't quite sure why, and he brought a lot of emotion to that character. Layla was also a super fun and interesting character, and I hope we get to see more of her in the future. Usually acting in the MCU is very solid, but Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke were on another level here. A few moments really stood out to me, like when Arthur Harrow was being judged by the goddess Ammit and he was willing to die for the cause. It was so believable, despite the fact that he was talking to a giant CGI crocodile. And Oscar Isaac had so many amazing moments, but the one that really stood out to me was where he was crying over the loss of his mother and the pain she has caused him, and then suddenly switched personality to Stephen Grant and he started acting lost and confused while still looking like a tragically broken man. It was just heartbreaking, but also kind of sweet at the same time. So far we have a very different version of the character from the comics, but developed in a way that was still interesting and fun to watch. Each episode was unique and felt new and fresh for Marvel. It hooked me on the characters and on the mystery, and it was so superbly acted. For the first 5 episodes, I got really invested in the show and the character story they were telling me for Marc Spector and Stephen Grant. And then we get to episode 6, the finale. For a show that was so unique and different for Marvel, one that was so character focused and personal, in the final episode, they went back to being just Marvel. It still had its good moments, particularly the third personality twist at the end, but it just became a cliche laser in the sky, world ending, big CGI monster fight, like most Marvel projects tend to be, despite the fact it had tried so hard to be different for the past 5 episodes. This is the same thing that happened to WandaVision. It was so unique and character based, but the finale just became a big CGI fight. Now I get it, I know that these are superhero shows and they need action endings, but they don't need to do these big CGI fights. They should give us small, personal action scenes. It really detracts from the rest of the show and what it had been setting up. Not only this, but I felt that the other Disney Plus Marvel shows, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, What If and Hawkeye, all gave themselves too much to do in the final episode. They left too much to resolve in just one episode that the finales so far have felt rushed and underwhelming. Loki was the only show that stuck the landing with a smaller and more personal finale. And it's frustrating because Moon Knight does the same mistake again. It has too much to do in one final episode that it feels rushed. And the final episode was the shortest one of the whole series. They had to quickly rush saving Stephen Grant, then bringing Moon Knight back to life, resolve the issues between Marc and Stephen, free Khonshu, stop Arthur Harrow and Ammit, answer questions about what was going on in the asylum in his mind, explain the third personality that was being hinted at, and tie up any loose ends. Plus, they decided to introduce some new plot threads in episode 6, like Layla trying to hunt down and kill Harrow and becoming an avatar of a different god. So many aspects like Stephen coming back to life and Layla becoming an avatar felt so rushed and out of nowhere, it made me wonder whether they should have just not done these plots in the first place. And it still left many questions unanswered, particularly from the first 2 episodes. Marvel really need to work on focusing their shows and finales, because a frustrating pattern is showing of too many plot threads and having overstuffed finales. Cut down the plot lines or give us more episodes. If Moon Knight stuck the landing, I think it easily would have been Marvel's strongest Disney Plus show, but it didn't. And while the show was unique, Intriguing and fun, with amazing characters and incredible acting, plus an awesome mid-credit scene. The show had worked so hard to be unique, but unfortunately it ended with a generic, rushed, CGI Marvel finale. I really enjoyed Moon Knight. It was good, but it was almost brilliant. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought about Moon Knight in the comments down below. I really want to hear all of your thoughts on this. Did this show's finale work for you? Be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel out. There will be more videos coming soon, but for now, thanks for watching. Cinemaze.